guys, this is SyedaZaidi, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys a topic in pre-calculus. Topic is 4.4. It's based on graphs and graphs of sine and cosine, and just teaches you about the information that you should know while doing this. And yes, so first I want to show you guys a review before you start. So this review contains stuff that will be on the equation, so like you will need to identify which one is what is this, what is that in the problem. So for starters, now the most common equations you will find is this, so like a sine and then parenthesis b x plus c. You can plus and negative, doesn't have to be only plus. And then plus and negative d. So, and the same thing with cosine too. You see a cosine, parenthesis b plus or negative c plus negative d. So these kind of formula, or these kind of like structures, kind of problems will be on the test, or when you're doing the problems, you will kind of see those, and then you will have to identify, graph them, and you will have to identify what a and b and c and d is. So that's why I'm showing you guys this, so you guys know what to do or what you should know while expecting to do the problems. So now the amplitude is basically the a. You see how a is right there? So a is the amplitude. It's always in the beginning of the equation, but it's never negative. So if you see a negative on the problem and it says negative 6 cosine, the negative 6 will turn to a positive when you're jotting down the characteristics of the problem. But when there's a negative on the equation of negative, if there's a negative a on the problem, it's always positive a. When they ask what a is and it's negative, always put the positive in, because negative wouldn't make any sense, since it's like half. It's half the. Sorry, I cannot see. It's half the height of the wave. So it'll be like, you know how there's a wave right there? So basically, graphs of sine and cosine, they always have like a wavy graph all the time, no exceptions. They always have wave kind of graphing. And when it is a wave, it depends on what kind of, how many periods they're going to be, or how many cycles they're going to be. Most of the time it's only one cycle, but yeah. And so basically the wave just shows you like the half of it, and basically that's what a means. So the period, now the period has a formula you should be writing down, which is 2 pi over b. Basically 2 pi over b, so the period will always be over here as b. You see how b is right there? The period will most likely be after the trigonometric function. So example was like, if example was like a cosecant 5 over 5, okay? Like 6 cosecant b. Sorry, 6 cosecant 5. So you have to use 5 in order to use the formula. You have to put 5 in the formula. So now the b is where you put the. You see how b is right here? See, it's b and then b. So, so you can kind of see what you should do, right? You should substitute the 5 in the b, right? But as an example, there was 5 in the b right now, but there's no 5 in the b. It's just b. So it would basically be like 2 pi over b, But when there is something for b and there's like another equation, always substitute b for that, okay? And basically what the period means is that the length of one full cycle of the wave. So now period is the full cycle, but the amplitude is the half of the cycle. So you can kind of see the difference how it is going because of the formula they have. But basically this is the full cycle that you should know about, the period. Okay, and now the frequency. Now the frequency is not that mostly common in some graphs, but sometimes they will ask you what the frequency is in some different topics. So you should most definitely know this also. Basically this is kind of like the period, but the opposite of the period. So this one is like, so b is first and then over 2 pi. So it's kind of the opposite of period. And when you're doing the frequency, always remember that don't put the answer that you already got while solving the period. Don't do that. You have to basically if you get an example B was 5, right? If you did 2 pi over 5 and you solved it, don't you solved it for only the period. But when you're solving it for frequency, do 5 over 2 pi. Don't ever solve it and say, oh, B is apparently 6.7 while solving 2 pi over 5. Don't do that. Only just literally, it's literally the opposite. Don't solve anything until you actually done with the frequency. So you can solve period, but like don't solve. Basically, you have to solve the frequency, obviously, but what I'm saying is don't get it mixed up with period and frequency. It's always the opposite of the period. It's always the opposite of both of them. Now, the frequency means that the number of complete cycles in a unit. Now, this is a complete cycle. So the period is a full cycle, but the frequency is a full unit cycle. Like, you know what I mean? Like a full cycle instead of like complete. But I mean, it's the same thing, but it's more like, I guess, complex, I guess you could say. But you will see like an example, because right now I'm not really explaining it that well, but when you see like an example, you would see what I mean by that. Now, the phase shift. Now, the phase shift is basically, what does the phase shift mean? So, C over B. Now, C over B is different. It's way different than that. So, C over B is basically after, so you see how this is B, right? So, B plus a negative C. Now, these both C's are in phase shift. Now, C is always a phase shift. Now, okay, so this is the first problem, and this problem is kind of like a basic problem, and just kind of like a review of what you kind of learned about previously. So I said that, so basically the question asks you to find the period and amplitude. So y equals 6 sine 2x. Now this is the equation, right? And we have to find what is period and what is amplitude. So as you guys know before, now the period has a formula, right? The period has a formula of 2 pi over b. Okay, and when there's 2 pi over b, that means that you have to substitute b. So you see how this kind of equation would be based on a example. Okay, sorry, my bad. I am making a mistake already. Oopsies. So it would be like a sine b plus c or negative plus negative d. So basically, as you see, you can kind of see how it's kind of similar, right? Or sorry, bx, my bad. So you see how 6 is a right here, sine, same thing, and then 2x would be bx. Now, except they don't have the phase shift and the d part, so we're just gonna leave that off. Sometimes they don't have that because they make the equation something short and large, but this one is just short for now, since this is the situation we are in right now. So the period would equal to, now let's substitute 2 pi over to 2. So since b is 2 right there, so 2 pi over 2 would equal to just pi. So the period is just pi, that's all. Okay, the amplitude, now the amplitude is always 6. Now, remember when I guys told you guys about how if there's like a negative right here, right? If there's a negative right here, this would not be negative 6, because it would not make any sense when it's, because like it's half of the cycle, right? So it wouldn't make any sense. So it would just become positive. If this was negative 6, it would just become positive. All right. So basically, but right for now, since there's no negative, it just be 6. Don't put it to negative. It just be 6. There's no negatives at all. The thing is that we would solve for phase shift and frequency, but the thing is that since we don't have the C and D, we can't do that. So they only ask for period and amplitude. Okay, so this is the second problem, and this problem is a little more complex since there's a graph now. But now we're gonna start doing we're gonna start sketching graphs, and it's gonna be a little more longer and has more steps than the usual first one. But now this one says sketch the graph of the function f of x equals sine 4x. Now the thing is that for this problem we have to identify many things. First of all, since it's only sine 4x, that means we're only going to have to we're only going to have to describe the amplitude and period only, and then we're going to start doing the key points. Now, in order to solve this graph, we need points in order to solve it, and I'll show you guys how to do that real quick while we are solving our way throughout. So first of all, the first step you should do is always identify what the A and the P is. Now, A means amplitude and P equals period. So the A would equal to basically just 1. Since there's nothing, it won't be 0, because if it was 0, it would be 0. But there's no 0 at all. So it'd just be 1. There's always an imaginary 1 right here, all the time. If you guys didn't know that. But yeah, it would just be 1. Now, so for the P, you see sine 4x, right? So the P would equal, now the formula for period has 2 pi over b. I'll remember that, guys. I'll remember that. Oh, it'd be actually lowercase b, but, you know. Let me just do this since you guys are not confused. B is 2 pi over b, okay? Now, once 2 pi over b, that means that it will be 2 pi over 4, because the 4 is the b, right? Remember? A sine b x, right? So 2 pi over 4 would equal to pi over 2. When you simplify it, it will be equal to pi over 2. So the period is pi over 2, right? Now we have to identify the key points, or the y and x points. So basically, how we're going to do this. So if you know about anything, we always kind of start with like 0. Sometimes people start with like 0, 2, 1 and stuff. But for this kind of equation, or this problem, we're going to have kind of like more. Actually, this won't really fit. Let me just erase this real quick. Sorry about that, guys. Let me just do it without the box, the table. So let's start. So let's just start with 0. So obviously, when you replace x to 0, it'll be just 0, right? So 0. Basically, what you're gonna do is that replace. So basically, whatever you have for x in the table, always replace it to sine 4x, which is like x right here. So example was like sine 0, which would be sine 4 parentheses 0. Okay. Now the first point is 0, 0. So we're just gonna put 0, 0 right here. All right. Now it's asking for another one. Let's do another one. So let's do pi over 8 over. So if you replace 4x to pi over 8, it will equal to 1. Now if it's a pi over 8 to 1, so where should we find pi 8 from? The pi 8 is over between pi over 4. So we're going to put it to 1 here, okay? Now the next point we're going to do is, let's do pi over 4. Pi over 4, replace it to x, substitute x for pi over 4, which would equal to 0. And when we do that, it will just be over here, right? But the thing is, it will be actually on both sides, but I'll show you guys what it looks like on both sides in a minute. So now we're going to just do another point. So you always need 5 points all the time, okay? So let's do, what should we do now? 3 pi over 8? Let's do 3 pi over 8. Now 3 pi over 8 would be what? So if you replace 3 pi to, if you substitute x 3 pi over 8, it will be equal to -1, I'm pretty sure. So now 3 pi over 8 is around between these two, so it would just be right here. All right. Now let's do pi over 2. Okay. Pi over 2, substitute x for that would equal to 0. Now, where's pi over 2? So it's right here. So basically, this is how it's going to look like. It's kind of really too small to identify, but this is how it will look like most likely. So basically, this is how it's kind of like. It's kind of too small for that right now, but if you want to do the other side, just plot the same points. So for example, I forgot to put a point here. Okay, yeah, but basically this is how it look like in one period. But if it was 2 periods, then you would do another point right like that. Be like an opposite of that, but not opposite, but like the same. But it's just like going to like the same way. So this is how you solve the graph for f of x equals sine of 4x. Okay, so this is the third problem, and this one is actually cosine now instead of secant. instead of sine. So this one says sketch a graph of the function y equals 1/2 cosine x. Now this one's a little bit different since there's decimals. I couldn't really fit my fraction, so I had to do decimal instead. But you will know what I mean by by the decimals when I do the when I graph the function. So the function is y equals 1/2 cosine x. So first of all, what I did is that first of all we need to do the steps. Now the first step is always to identify the a and the p, period and amplitude. Now so this one we're only gonna identify a and p because first there's no phase shift and there's no anything that there is no like vertical translation or anything. So we're just gonna be using amplitude and period to identify, because if there was a phase shift, we would have done phase shift. We would have identified phase shift, but there's no phase shift at all. So a equals 1/2. Well, you see, there's no negative, so it's just 1/2 cosine x. So there's no period at all. It won't just be 1 actually. It just be, honestly, it's only gonna be 2 pi now. You can just do 2 pi over 1 because there's always a 1, right? There's always a 1 right here. There's always an imaginary 1. If it just says x, there's always an imaginary 1 before that. So it's 2 pi over 1, which equals to 2 pi. Okay? Now, let's start with the points. So the points is kind of going to be like, so I'm going to use fractions instead of decimals, but if you do want to simplify the fractions, see what kind of decimals they are, please do that so you guys understand what I mean by that. But most of the time, we're going to be using 0.5. And 0.5 is equal to what? 1/2, right? So just remember that 0.5 equals to 1/2. So the first step we're going to be doing is, let's do the points. So let's do 0 as x. Now, remember that to simplify the 0 to cosine x, okay? So 0, and then let's do 1/2, which would basically equal to 1/2. So when it is equal to 1/2, it would be basically right over there. All right, so basically it'll be 0 1/2 since 0.5 goes to 1/2, okay? Next off is gonna be another point. Let's do, because we need 5 points in order to solve this, in order to like graph this function. So let's do pi over 2. So when you do simplify x for pi over 2, it would be, what would it be again? I forgot. Pi over 2, 0, right? So pi over 2 would be equal to 0, okay? Now, next point we're going to do is that, let's do pi, and then that would equal to negative 1/2, I'm pretty sure. Okay, that's the third point. Fourth point would be 3 pi over 2, and 3 pi over 2 would equal to 0. And then, last but not least, the fifth point would be equal to 2 pi over 1/2. Okay? Now jot down. Now we have to jot down all the points. So let me jot this down real quick. So pi negative 1/2. Okay, we got that. We got that already, right? 3 pi over 2. Most likely equal to right here. No, sorry, it would be equal to, I'm so sorry. I'm being really confused right now at this point. Okay? Then pi over 2 would equal to here. Pi over 0, right? Okay, yeah. Got it. Now 2 pi 1/2 would equal to, basically we're gonna have to go up. So it's gonna be it's gonna be like this. But if you think about it, if you do the other side, so for example, if it was right here, and then, so you guys don't get confused what I mean by the other side. 0.5 right here, and then 2 pi. So then you will see what I mean by, so you kind of see like the cycle, right? It's kind of like going like over like this, because cosines are always like in this kind of position. But if it was like a negative cosine, then it would go down. If it was like a negative amplitude, it would position down way. But right now it's gonna be up. So this is how you solve cosine graphs.